Barack Obama says he's got a new plan for peace in the Middle East. All we have to do, he says, is give the Palestinians their own state, with contiguous borders carved out of the territory Israel captured in the 1967 Six-Day War. In fact, there's nothing new about this plan at all. The plan actually dates back to 1948 when Israel was recreated. At that time, so-called quote-unquote Palestinian Arabs got their own state, but they rejected it along with the rest of the Arab world. But still, the myth persists that the key to a Middle Eastern peace is granting quote-unquote Palestinians a homeland and Muslims control over sites they consider holy. Well, as an Arab-American journalist who has spent some time in the Middle East dodging more than my share of rocks and mortar shells, I've got to tell you that these are just phony claims for an asymmetrical, genocidal campaign against the Jews of Israel. Isn't it interesting that prior to the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, there was no serious movement for a quote-unquote Palestinian homeland? Well, Farah, you might say, that was before the Israelis seized the West Bank and Old Jerusalem. That's true. In the Six-Day War, Israel captured Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem. But they didn't capture those territories from the Palestinian Authority or Hamas. They captured them from Jordan's King Hussein. I can't help but wonder why all these Palestinians suddenly discovered their national identity after Israel won the war. The truth is that Palestine is no more real than Never Never Land. The first time the name was used was AD 70, when the Romans committed genocide against the Jews, smashed the temple, and declared the land of Israel would be no more. From then on, the Romans promised it would be known as Palestine. The name was derived from the Philistines, a Goliathian people conquered by the Jews centuries earlier. It was a way for the Romans to add insult to injury. They also tried to change the name of Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina, but that had even less staying power. Palestine has never existed before or since as an autonomous entity. It was ruled alternately by Rome, the Islamic and Christian crusaders, by the Ottoman Empire, and briefly by the British after World War I. The British agreed to restore at least part of the land to the Jewish people as their homeland. There is no language known as Palestinian. There is no distinct Palestinian culture. There has never even been a land known as Palestine governed by Palestinians. Palestinians are Arabs, indistinguishable from Jordanians, another invention, Syrians, Lebanese, Iraqis, etc. Keep in mind that the Arabs control 99.9% of the Middle Eastern lands. Israel represents 0.1% of the landmass. But that's too much for the Arabs. They want it all. And that is ultimately what the fighting in Israel is about today. Greed, pride, envy, covetousness. No matter how many land concessions the Israelis make, it'll never be enough. What about Islam's holy sites? There are none in Jerusalem. Shocked? You should be. I don't expect you would ever hear this brutal truth from anyone else in the international media. It's just not politically correct. I know what you're going to say. Farah, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem represent Islam's third most holy sites. Not true. In fact, the Quran says nothing about Jerusalem. It mentions Mecca hundreds of times. It mentions Medina countless times, but it never mentions Jerusalem, with good reason. There is no historical evidence to suggest Muhammad ever visited Jerusalem. So, how did Jerusalem become the third holiest site in Islam? Muslims today cite a vague passage in the Quran, the 17th surah, entitled The Night Journey. It relates that in a dream or a vision, Muhammad was carried by night, quote, from the sacred temple to the temple that is most remote, whose precinct we have blessed, that we might show him our signs, unquote. In the 7th century, some Muslims identified the two temples mentioned in this verse as being in Mecca and Jerusalem. And that's as close as Islam's connection with Jerusalem gets. Myth, fantasy, wishful thinking. Meanwhile, Jews could trace their roots in Jerusalem back to the days of Abraham. So, what's the solution to the Middle Eastern mayhem? Well, frankly, I don't think there is a man-made solution to the violence, but there is one, possibly, and it needs to begin with the truth. Pretending will only lead to more chaos. Treating a 5,000-year-old birthright backed by overwhelming historical and archaeological evidence with illegitimate claims on an equal basis, wishes and wants, this gives diplomacy and peacekeeping a bad name.